Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Joe Marcello. And it's not just any Friday, guys. It's the beginning of summer. It's the first day of summer today. So get out there, enjoy the weather, do some grilling. But just wait until after you listen to our episode, of course. And if you're like me, you listen to or watch movies that are appropriate for the season. So, around Christmas time, you're watching the holiday flicks like, I don't know, Die Hard. But in this case, it's summer, so I like to watch Jaws. I do it all the time, every summer. And coincidentally enough, it's the 50th anniversary of Jaws, guys. So today I'm bringing you our interview with Marty Milner. Marty was a senior foreman on Jaws. Him and his crew basically created Amity. The look, the feel, the sets, more importantly, the sets. Most of what you saw was created by Marty and his crew. Um, they went over to Martha's Vineyard, shook things up, pissed people off. They weren't too happy about having a movie crew there. But I'm sure nowadays they certainly don't mind. And like I said, it's the 50th anniversary. So if you get a chance, go up to the Vineyard, enjoy what they have going on. And before you do that, listen to this interview. So without further ado, this is Marty Milner. Marty Milner, the man who just look, he made our childhood come alive. If seen Jaws, like, and you are a fan like I have, this is the man behind the scenes who made a lot of it possible. Thank you so much for talking to us, Marty.
Sure thing, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here, and hi to all the people, all the
Thank you.
fans out there.
Thank you so much. Let's start at the beginning. How did you get your start in the business?
Well, basically, I lived on Martha's Vineyard for 20 years in all six island towns. And back in 74, I was a carpenter, and we all got together on Thursday nights at one of the local drinking establishments because that was just what people did back then. And, we would hang out, have a couple of beers, talk about work, see if anybody needed any work. You basically make connections to people. It was kind of like a social networking kind of thing. It's a small community. A lot of people worked for a living, and a lot of carpenters had short-term jobs. So there was always people needing work. So one night I was there with a friend of mine, Bobby Imony, and these two guys were walking around talking to people, and everybody kept pointing at me. So they walked over to me, and that was Jim Woods and Ward Welton. Ward Welton was they call him a painter, but he was essentially the construction coordinator. Although you're not allowed, there's a lot of union rules about what you're allowed to call people and stuff. He was basically the construction coordinator, but he was only titled a painter. So Ward and Jim talked to me, and I knew a lot about carpentry. I had a truck full of tools right out in the parking lot, which I offered to show them because back then there was something called the Whole Earth Catalog. And you ordered tools and things like that, or whatever you wanted to do with your life, you could find it in the Whole Earth Catalog. So I was buying tools like a crazy person. And I had a lot of all the carpentry tools you need to frame up a house or to finish it. And I was talking to them about carpentry, and they could tell right away that I knew what I was doing. They asked me about prefabrication. And there's people on the island that have retired that are what I call local island geniuses. And they are literally geniuses who have come to rest, in their final years on Martha's Vineyard. And there was a guy named Milton Wend, who was a relatively well-known person in certain circles. And he was a big fan of prefabrication and wanted to do some prefabricated homes that were built elsewhere and moved to the island. And I'd spent many, many hours talking to Milton about prefabrication. So when they were talking to me about prefabrication, I could fill in the blanks, and I gave them ideas, and they knew that I was a relatively intelligent person, and I could not only carry the conversation, but I had the tools to like make things happen. So they asked me if I wanted to work on a movie they were going to make. It was going to be a short run, probably 30, maybe 60 at most, maybe 90 days. And they needed somebody to help hire the local people to get the sets built. A good friend of mine was Bernie Fierro, who was married to Lee Fierro, And Lee Fierro was one of the people that ran Island Theater Workshop with a woman named Mary Payne. And I had built different sets for Lee and Mary, Amal and the Night Visitors. We did A Wrinkle in Time, things like that. So I was not unfamiliar with theater construction. So that was it. And like a month later, I think it was around, that was probably middle of February, early March. And probably a month later, early April, I got the call and went down to Eggertown, to the Eggertown boatyard called Norton and Easterbrooks. And there I met up again with Ward and Jim, and we started hiring people and going over the blueprints. Now, to put this, our little interview here in context for the audience that we're talking to, it's like what we have here is a discussion of a storyboard. And a storyboard is essentially a comic. And there's a continuity of the storyline, but you also see each shot that the camera is supposed to make. And the same thing happens in a comic book. And it's all about storytelling. And you can tell a story with smells, you can tell a story with certain dynamic shots, you can put emotion into it, you can put speech bubbles in, you can make it a bigger boat if you need to. And that's the whole point of the story, is to make it happen. Now, the storyteller is one person, and the person filming the storyteller or doing the book of the storyteller is another person. And then there's the guy behind the scenes who has to make things that are going to go with the story. That was me trying to figure out how to build, like, for instance, the beach scene. The beach scene did not exist. That's an empty beach. We built everything that's on the beach scene, and we started in late March, early April, and started the beach scene, putting everything together, trying different things to see what would work, what wouldn't work, how to make it, like the cabanas, for instance. We took a 2x3 and we ripped it in half. And then we used that standard framing, 16 inches on center, covered that with a sheet of masonite. And if you turn masonite backwards, the bad side of masonite looks like canvas. So those cabanas are made out of basically 2x3s ripped in half, covered with masonite. And then each roof section is not prefabricated, it's a solid piece. So you've got 4 walls, no floor, and a cap that goes on top of it. And we made, I think it was like 11 or 12 of those, but only 8 were actually used, because you always have to make extras. Mm-hmm. Things break, they get damaged, they get vandalized, whatever. And then you've got to paint them all like they're new. And then you have to age them. So everything is painted as though it's brand new. And then you go back, and the word Ward used was scrumble. You have to go back with a Hudson sprayer, which is a hand sprayer. It's a hand pump sprayer. And you go back and you add age to different areas where it would have naturally aged. So we did that with the arcade, with the hot dog stand, with the bandstand, which we call the gazebo. Now, and then we also built the boardwalks, which was all raw new lumber. And then we aged it gray so it looked like aged cedar. And then we scrumbled it so that putting all that together, taking it apart, putting it back together again, making sure we knew how to do that, that went on in a mad flurry because nobody knew what was going to be shot first. Now, they delivered the Orca. The Orca was originally called the Warlock, and the Warlock was probably a lobsterman, but it was basically a New England fishing boat. And Joe Alves, who was the production designer, he came down and talked it over with Ward and a few other people, and they changed it around. So we remanufactured the Orca in the side yard of the boatyard where we were working, and then we made a duplicate of it. So we painted the hull of the Orca 1 with motor oil, and then we stapled fiberglass cloth onto it, and then painted it with fiberglass, and built that hull that we were using the original boat as a mold, essentially. And then we peeled that off, and we had all these staples that were sticking out of it, and it was really a rough mess. So we ground all that off. I got a ton of fiberglass in my skin, and basically had to throw away a bunch of clothes. So we dragged those pieces back inside the boathouse, and then we went from one boat to the other boat, uh, and we made the model of the Orca 2 based exactly and identically like Orca 1. So at one point we had the Orca 1 that was finished and fine-tuned the way the production designer Joe Alves wanted it. And we built an exact identical copy of it inside the boathouse, which was virtually, it was technically perfect. I mean, I painted seagull shit like a number of times on both of them, exactly the same pattern of seagull poop on each boat, so
Wow.
that it was in exactly the same spot. Because the rule of thumb was, don't spend any extra money, make everything identical. It's about continuity. It's
Mhm.
about the camera. So when the camera shows a scene on the boat, nobody should know which boat it was. It has to be perfect and it has to be identical. So the Orca 2 didn't require an interior cabin on the forward part of the boat. The Orca 1 had a forward cabin, but it had to be gutted. After we were done manufacturing both boats, we then had to reset the water line, and we had to like reballast the boat because everything had changed. The height of the mast had changed. There's a lot of leverage in a mast when it's flipping around in the waves, and steel rigging, and also there had to be a lot of metal work done. Now there are a lot of people that were local islanders. A friend of mine, Jim Blaine, did most of the metal work on that. Different people. Alan Albee was essentially the central Finnish carpenter for all a lot of the detail. He's passed away since then. A good friend of mine, Gino Mezzafero, and I did a lot of the other Finnish carpentry, and there was like all kinds of the cushions in the Orca were covered with maroon naugahyde. And the stain inside the cabin, I believe, was an antique American walnut, probably a Minwax. But and we put, the mast is basically made out of sugar pine, held together with weldwood resorcinol glue, and basically 10-penny finish nails. And um, the fact that those two masts held together with the kind of abuse that they put those boats through, because they did multiple shots of the sinking and stuff. So it was like
Mhm.
it was not an easy thing we didn't know what to expect or how to do any of that. So essentially, I worked 32 days straight without a day off, and I was near the point of complete exhaustion. But we had, and then they started like trying to shoot. They did the arm on the beach scene with a couple of cabanas off in the distance, and then they had a little problem with weather, so we then did took all the beach set out to the beach, and we kept moving it around. And Joe Alves, who was the production designer, basically visually designed it, and then we had to like make sure it all looked level, plumb, and square, and it had to look like it had been there forever. Like the masts on the cabanas and the bandstand, they had to line up. They all had to be plumb, so that's not an accident. The way that beach scene looks, there was a lot of people carrying the pieces of each of those buildings on the sand for probably close to half a mile. And then assembling them and then taking them apart, putting them back together, moving them 2 or 3 feet in one direction, 2 or 3 feet in another direction. It was like a pretty chaotic thing. So at one point we had the two boats um, in the boatyard that we were working on, and we had the beach scene with the bandstand. Now the bandstand, that gave me nightmares. That was, if you look at that bandstand, there's 8 posts. It's octagonal. There's probably, I don't know, I think I made 100 or 120 slats for that. Half were yellow and half were green. And essentially, there's nothing holding that bandstand up, keeping it from twisting. It's like there's no lateral support. I put some plywood gussets inside of it to keep it from twisting, but they weren't long enough to actually, if a good wind came along, that could twist and come right down and probably kill somebody. So and it was prefabricated, 8 sections in the roof,
Oh,
and
wow.
the 8 posts, and then the boardwalk underneath it. So it was a pretty flimsy, heavy, floating roof over 8 porch posts. And just to look at it, you'd say, "Oh, that's a bandstand. That's a gazebo." Well, it's totally it's structurally unsound. It's a really dangerous piece. As were the Orca One, was we remanufactured it and we got a bunch of lead and cement to cover the ballast issue. But if you look at it when it's moving through the sea, it's not a seaworthy vessel. It
Oh,
was
really?
basically it's like it could travel on its own power. But the way it cuts through the and the way it sits on the water and the way it cuts through waves, that was not what I would consider to be a seaworthy vessel. And the Orca 2 had no bottom. There was a steel frame built underneath that with 55-gallon drums that were rigged to trip. So you could have the boat go down by the bow, you could have it go down by the stern, you could have it tilt left, you could have it tilt right, and different degrees of up and downness, in terms of like as it's sinking or when it's going down, there was some control. Now, the while all that was going on, we we had to build Quint's house, which was designed by Joe Alves based on the Sculpin Gallery in Edgartown, which is one of the island towns. So we had to build Quint's house up in Menemsha, and that was a political issue. It's a very small lot, and if you ever go there, if you're ever on the island and you look at that lot, a lot of the work that went into that Quint's house had to be built at the boatyard and then trucked up to the site because there was nowhere to work. It's a very small work area. There's also no parking. So there's no parking and there's no place to move. There's no place to store lumber. So basically, that was a logistical communication between me and Bobby Imony about what he needed and when he needed it precisely. Simultaneously, you've got the 4th of July uh, parade in Edgartown. And then as the Quint house is being built, you've got the billboard to be built.
Mhm.
And the billboard was basically made in 2 sections and then driven all the way to the other end of the island in a town that used to be called Gay Head. It's now called Aquina. And we got the telephone company to install 4 telephone poles. And then I trucked it up there with a good friend of mine, Nat Bookman, who is a teamster from New Bedford. And Nat delivered the two the 2 sections of the billboard, and a bunch of me and a bunch of my guys up there hoisted it up on these 4 telephone poles with a catwalk that we built out of 2x4s and muscled it into position using ropes and a pulley and stuff like that. So it was a lot of what we did was done on the fly, and the whole time it was all political. There was a lot of people that didn't want the billboard put up at all. It was an insult to the town, blah, blah, blah. The 4th of July parade hurt people's business theoretically. And there's a lot of people just not wanting to cooperate with a movie that was being made by some, B-string director nobody had ever heard of before. By the way, Steven and I are the same age.
Well, I want to ask about that, and I don't mean to cut you
Yeah.
off, but like
No, go ahead. Please
this
interject.
is, we are talking about Jaws and Steven Spielberg looking through the lens of people living in 2025. And at the time, what were yourself and clearly the people in on the Vineyard were none too pleased. But when you're approached to create all this, all these sets and um, everything that you built, what are your thoughts? Are you thinking, wow, this is going to be pretty amazing, or you're like, well, this is just this is just work, and
That's
let's
that
just do our
that's a
best.
good question, Joe. And the answer is, and I use this word, people don't know the word, but I use it all the time. There's a word, entrainment. And entrainment is when things come together. It's like if you have a sine wave and you see the sine wave, it goes up and down and up and down. And there's a second thing going on and it gets almost the same sine wave. And then you tune them both together. And then that's entrainment. Uh, it's a scientific term. It also can have something to do with like a quantum entanglement, if you know what that is. And if you don't, that's okay. Entanglement can be two of the same things, two of the same photons from the same source of light are separated, but they still can communicate. Now, when they came to the island, they didn't have a script. They had a general outline. The storyboard was not complete. There were holes in the storyboard. They had never shot a movie on the ocean before, hadn't been done. Uh, the uh, he was a young kid, had a relatively good head of hair. I was, you know, bald then, even then.
Hey,
And
look,
he was a good guy. He rode his bike down to the boathouse every once in a while, and we would chat. And there were people from Hollywood that had come along, and they were feather bedding, and there were teamsters that were on the payroll that did nothing, and they were sitting around doing nothing. And there were people that essentially uh, didn't believe in the movie. And essentially, what I could detect is I sensed that they were trying to like make the movie fail or at least have some bad spots. And they could do that because of who they were and what their position was on the organizational chart. I didn't get involved in politics. All that stuff happened above the line.
mhm.
And if you look at our organizational chart of a movie, there's like 7 to 14 departments, and there's like 9 guys in each row, and they all communicate to each other across different uh, leaders. And those leaders, like Ward would talk to Joe Alves would talk to Steven Spielberg would talk to Zanuck and Brown would talk to Joe Alves, and it's like this whole level of communication above the line. Below the line, you just do your job. And I found that it was more useful to me to get rid of the people who were in the way that weren't doing anything or that were just not putting in a good effort. And Ward and I thinned out that crew once we got the bulk of the heavy lifting done. We thinned the crew down pretty quickly because a few people that with a directed amount of effort could make things happen. And the more people you had in the way ended up being in the way. So a natural resolve of entrainment, that coordinated melding of sine waves, happened about halfway through the movie. They were already over budget. They started off with $3 million. They had to run it up to $6 million, and then they were in the middle of the summer on Martha's Vineyard, and they had no idea what the weather was going to do. The sharks wouldn't work. They couldn't work. They were pretty, and when they were delivered, we took them to the second story of the boathouse and hid them up there. But somebody did sneak up and take pictures of it.
Mhm.
But nobody knew how they worked. And I was basically in charge of making sure that after that one incident where somebody did get up and take pictures of them, they made sure that like I took responsibility to make sure nobody got upstairs. So that was one of my jobs on top of everything else I was trying to do. And but getting the crew, like above the line crew, to get together, and they had a barge with all the pneumatic entrails that went to the control platform that they mounted the sharks on. And then they tried mounting the sharks, and they couldn't get the sharks to work with any degree of reliability. So they had to make up a suspenseful story. And that was people coming together, forcing it to happen. Now, in storytelling, and there's been a lot of storytelling for the last 250,000 years, which is how long we've been around as a species.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, during that 250,000 years, we've had 100 billion people born. So we've been telling stories for a long time. And the part of storytelling is an event occurs that causes entrainment to happen, and people remember that event. Doesn't matter if it's the Battle of Troy, doesn't matter if it's the Oracle, um, uh, it doesn't matter if it's like a World War II story of a boat that sank and all these people got eaten alive by sharks. But if you take that one event uh, of the sinking of the Indianapolis and how fearsome that was, and there isn't a single person in the world, most of the Jaws fans are Jaws fans because you saw someone get eaten alive and you want more information on how to prevent that from happening to you. And that is the story of the Indianapolis that was picked up by Benchley, that was converted by Spielberg, that was reanimated by the three guys who starred in Jaws and stitched together by the Quint speech that had several different origin stories, but regardless of what they are, it was delivered. And it was delivered correctly so that it stitched the movie together, and it grounded everything back to that original Indianapolis event.
Mm-hmm.
And I always use physics as a metaphor. That event was essentially a real piece of gravity. It pulled everybody's attention in while it was happening, after it happened, and for 50 years, for 100 years later, that story is going to live.
Oh, really?
Because it was the essence of a black hole. Now, when you have a black hole, light, Einstein will tell you, if he was around, that the when you have a entity that is heavy gravity, light will bend when it goes around it. We found out just recently from the James Webb Hubble Space Telescope, that when you're looking past a black hole that you cannot see, the light will bend around it, and something on the other side will appear 3 or 4 times around the black hole. And they couldn't figure out what that was. And what that was light bending around a black hole that they didn't know was there, because there were like 5 images of the same constellation, and they knew it was the same constellation, but they didn't know what was happening because they didn't know there was a black hole there. That's what happens with Jaws and all the Jaws peripheral stories that have gone on since. It all goes back to the gravity of the Indianapolis situation, because that pulls everything into it and distorts whatever vision is involved in that story. And that goes on, and it went on till the middle of the shoot. And then it coalesced, that entrainment happened. And the energy of the gravity of the Indianapolis destruction pulled, actually, I believe it pulled the team together all the way to the end of the shoot when Verna Fields showed up. Verna, like during you can Google Marty Milner editing Jaws, and there's a picture of me in the editing room with Verna Fields' son Rick, who my job was to look at some of the daily rushes and make sure there were no continuity errors that I could fix. So I saw Jaws in 1974, before anybody else saw it. Really, it was
Wow.
not my business to view the movie or the see the daily rushes, but I needed to do that to do my job. So I was watching Jaws before anybody was, and actually I saw some of the stuff before the people at the top of the chart saw what was going on because I had to fix stuff before, I could get fired at any minute, just like everyone else. So Verna showed up at the end of the movie, and she took a look, and she talked it over with Rick, her son, and she realized what she needed to get the actual story close to something that could be a story. So she took a couple of cameras and some crews and went and got a few shots. After the movie was done shooting on Martha's Vineyard, I finished up around early October, if I remember correctly. And then they took everything back out to Hollywood. And a good friend of mine, Kevin Pike, who got hired about halfway through the movie. And Kevin went out with them. And the scene where Craig Kingsbury's head pops out of the hole in the boat, that
Yeah.
was shot in Field's swimming pool. And the way they did that was they got a couple of gallons of milk and poured it into her swimming pool, and that's how you get that cloudy undersea kind of look. So, but she needed that shot to create another pop moment of suspense. So essentially, so um, my side of the story of Jaws is from the beginning to the end, it was not shot in order by any means. It
Okay.
was shot based on the cameras that they had and the weather that they had and the situation at each individual shoot that might have been determined by local politics. So there was like a constant, steady, um, just give it up. This isn't going to work. Go away. You're in the way. You're destroying everybody's life. You're ruining the business, whatever. And there was that constant stream of negativity. Now, when I was done with most of the crew work, I then got pressed into service to build a section in Oak Bluffs called Shark City, put a gate on the front of it so people couldn't go in and screw around with the sharks. All these little kids were there always trying to talk to the sharks, and I was inside the shark fixing it. So I would talk back to them and I could move the mouth. So I had fun with the local kids who were like, just like, and I'd say, hey, where are you going to go swimming? And I said, we're not going to tell you. And I said, well, I'll figure it out. I can smell you now, so I know what you smell like, and I can find out where you go swimming, and maybe we'll go swimming together. And they say, we're not going to go swimming then. So I had fun with the local kids, and I repaired the sharks. Now, the do you have any questions?
Yeah,
Or
you mentioned it not being shot in sequence, and I guess it's there are a lot of things having seen the movie so many times, and you watch it with friends, and you always tend to point out stuff that you never really thought of before. And the scene at the beginning of the movie where they start sending out people to catch the shark,
yeah,
and one thing that we certainly Ord and I point out to one another, like we know it's taking place right, 4th of July weekend, but those guys going out in those boats are wearing a lot of clothes for the summertime. So it led me to believe that scene or that sequence certainly wasn't shot during the summertime, because I know it gets cold around
well,
that
they
later
didn't
on in
have
the
the
year.
beach. They didn't have the beach set scene ready, Joe, and they needed to shoot something,
Got it.
and they went to sea and they created that like those havoc scenes. and the 4th of July scene, those were all shot way before June.
I thought
And
so. Yeah.
the beach scenes were shot in June. And you know what the water's like on Cape Cod in June. It's freezing.
Yeah.
And some of those kids were blue. They had blankets underneath their beach towels. And in between shots, they were all huddled up and they were like literally shivering. It was just like to try to pull that off,
Yeah.
uh, and the people of Martha's Vineyard and the extras, and my crew, my guys, everybody did the best they could to make that work, but there was no tuning fork to pull the entrainment together. So we had to do it on the fly because we didn't know what was happening or what would be happening next. And Lee Fierro, who is a dear friend of mine, who I was friends with for decades, um, she was a consummate professional. She had a Screen Actors Guild card. She refused to engage in vulgarity, which is how her character was written, and she said no. And she said she basically walked away from the part. And they basically called her back and they said, "We really want you." And she said, "I'm not going to do that. That's wrong for the character and it's wrong for me, and it will hurt your movie." And they basically agreed with her. So when she slapped Scheider across the face, she slapped him 17 times. And one of the times she knocked the glasses right off his face because she didn't pull her punches.
And this is Alice Kittner's mother, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, Lee was like, she was a professional actor and she worked with Island Theater Workshop and she trained a lot of people in theater. And she also had been involved in the early years of television, herself. So pulling all that together in terms of leadership, it's like you got Steven Spielberg, you got Zanuck and Brown, you got the money guy, Nick Charlazio, who's a wonderful guy. He was always walking around trying to find out where the money was going. And he'd come down to the boathouse and he'd ask me, he said, "This was just paid for. And can you show me where there's like 100 sheets of plywood?" I said, "Sure, right over here, Nick. Let's take a walk. I'll show it to you." And I said, "Yeah, it looks like we got about probably 40 sheets left, but that may be enough, but may not be, and then like everybody at the top end, they're all compartmentalized in terms of what they do. And like Steven Spielberg was actually writing the script, shooting the thing, talking to Carl Gottlieb, talking to Joe Alves. He had his hands full in terms of like doing leadership for an entire. I mean, I had close to 100 people that I was working with, and I only knew about probably 60 of them. So, and the rest were just hires that we put on because we needed extra hands to run things on the beach and stuff like that. So, and we needed painters and stuff like that. So, but it was like, in terms of like an actual leader who was addressing everybody, like Patton. It's like everybody knew who Patton was, and Patton basically got around enough so that he could lead his troops. And my father fought with Patton in World War II,
Oh
and
wow.
he was in charge of logistics for the 104th Infantry, which is, as you may or may not know, was based in Western Massachusetts. 104th Infantry Yankee Division was with Patton, Third Army, and he was in the Quartermaster Corps and had to deal with all that nonsense in terms of supply and logistics and making it happen, and not get overrun by Nazis and killed by fascists. So it's like, but that all that stuff, that issue of leadership and storytelling and getting everybody into the entrainment overlap so that things hum, that only happened at about halfway through the process. And the rest of the time, it was an avalanche of chaos. It was like, and I was saying earlier, the shark is essentially a bunch of steel tubes that I think were Army surplus, maybe Air Force surplus from bombers. And Joe Alves designed the shark, and it doesn't look exactly like a white shark because you got to fit a human being into the mouth.
Hmm.
And the great white's mouth is smaller than that and usually tears off chunks. So, but in order to get a full swallow, you've got to have a bigger mouth. So the mouth is disproportional based on a normal white shark. And then you've got the jowls where the mechanics have to come together, where it comes together. And
Hmm.
it's like, it's not an easy thing to make the mechanics of the shark. Let's see, the
Yeah.
mechanics of the shark actually work. And then you've got it to roll forward and roll back and go side to side, and the head shake. So all of that had mounted on it roughly it's about 2 or 3 inches thick of hard foam, and that hard foam was glued to the structure. But gluing on dry land a foam shell onto a metal tubular structure and holding it there looks fine. And as long as it's dry, it's as
Yeah.
pretty as a museum piece like the one they have in the movie museum out in LA now, or the shark's head that they have at the Martha's Vineyard Museum now.
Right.
And essentially, um, when you put it in the water, the foam absorbs water and it doesn't absorb it uniformly. And the glue joints on the steel tubes, some of it held, some of it didn't, and it started sliding around. And when you're using pneumatics and you have to push the ram a certain extension, if there's no stops and you don't know where the stops are, that skin is going to rip.
Hmm.
And that was happening constantly because they were trying to get the movements. And as they tested the movements, they tore the side. So somebody had to fix the shark. That was me because it happened at night. They brought
Oh,
the
wow.
sharks back, and basically you had to like get what's called, I call it a torpedo. It's one of those kerosene heaters that you see. They look like an aqualung, but they're kerosene heater. And basically, you take a razor knife and you cut off all the ripped up sloppy foam, and then you basically take there's an epoxy which is flexible, and you mix the flexible epoxy, but you mix the hardener based on how long you want it to set up. So what I would do is I would clean the wound so that I had good surfaces, and then I would put those surfaces together. And there's something called a hog ring plier, which basically is like that. And essentially, it's like a surgical staple. So what I would do is I would dry the wound, then I would paint it with epoxy, then I would pinch it together with these surgical staples
Hmm.
all along the wound. Then I would paint it with a thicker coat of epoxy on the outside of the skin. Then I would cover it with 4-way ripstop nylon that was dipped in epoxy. Then I would put 2 more coats on top of that. So each of those coats of epoxy, it was between like say 2 and 8 coats of epoxy on each tear that had to set up completely before the next morning when the sharks went back out to sea. So, and then while I was hanging around, because I was working like 14 hours a day or more,
Wow.
sometimes 18 hours a day. I was basically exhausted. And and nobody cared. It's like somebody had to get that done, and nobody knew who
Hmm.
did or how they did it because they just needed what they needed. They didn't care how it got there. And a lot of the people from Hollywood just couldn't work on the sharks because it was disgusting. The inside of the shark, as the sea went around, it got filled up with microorganisms. It smelled like low tide. It was really an offensive. It got worse as the summer went along, and it was not unlike low tide. If you know low tide on the ocean,
Yes.
it's not good. And basically, I had to work in that environment and get it repaired. And then I crawled while I was waiting for my repairs. I would go inside and look around at where skeleton on the inside was attached to the skin and see what was breaking. And I would try to do reinforcement repairs, some of which were really badly executed by me, but at least they were executed and they did help, they did hold, because I never knew what they were going to do with that shark once it left. So repairing the shark was a difficult. In fact, I have a scar on my thumb where I was working on the teeth. The teeth are all molded, and there's a hard tooth and a soft tooth. If you've got a human being in the jaws, it's got to be a soft teeth. They all have to be soft teeth. If you've got it going through the cabin wall or the stern, you use the harder teeth. And I slipped and I tore open my thumb. It's probably
Oh, wow.
a 3-inch slit in my thumb. I just held it together with 4 Band-Aids and went back to work. Those are different days.
Sounds like when I cook.
But I actually have a shark scar from the actual shark to compare with, if we're like comparing sharks around the table on the Orca.
Say you have your own battle scar. That's pretty impressive.
Getting the shark functional or functional enough was and there were 4 sharks. There was a right view, there was a left view, there was a front view, and there was a sea sled view. And because they all had to have their control wires coming out of one side or the other side. And that was basically, so it was either a front view, like a top view, open sea view, or it was a left side or a right side, depending on where the entrails, the pneumatic entrails came out of the shark. So those, if one was being repaired, they were using a different one, and then they would break both of them and bring them back, and they take one of the other ones out, and then I would work with Roy Arbogast and Roy's son, Michael, who was about 10 years old at the time. And Michael is an uncredited worker on the movie Jaws. He's in the movie business now, and he's a good guy. And we connected, decades later, but I remember him and he remembered me because he was Roy's son, and he was working at Shark City. And Roy said, "Would you mind having him work over your shoulder?" I said, "Hell no, I'd love that. That'd be great." So, but we made the shark's teeth. In fact, Michael still makes those shark's teeth from the same molds. And we had the molds, and there were these teeth that go like smaller teeth on the outside, bigger teeth on the inside. And basically, there's a little square peg at the bottom of them. And essentially, you cut into the foam, you paint it with epoxy, you set the teeth, and then you look at it from like at least 3 different angles to make sure that it looks like a realistic shark's mouth. And that's basically how we did the teeth. And then we the shark when the shark goes through the cabin wall, that cabin wall and the stern was either made out of sugar pine. We made 3 of each out of sugar pine, and we made 3 of each out of balsa wood. And the balsa wood is a real nasty wood to work with. It's like a fine, acrid powder. It's almost like a dust. It's not like a sawdust. It's more like a just a nasty dust. It smells terrible. And but the sugar pine's a beautiful wood to work. We use the sugar pine to make the mast and the arm that comes off the mast that they pull the cage up with. Mm-hmm. But all of that stuff was all going on while they had their chaos out at sea. They were like, you've seen the pictures of like 50 people jammed onto a boat, right, and like all kinds of like nonsense going on out there. I was too busy to go out. I was working all the time, either working on the sets or working on the sharks, because those people, that cost $70,000 a day back then. Wow. And there was no such thing as them sitting around waiting for Marty Milner. It's like Ward and I basically cut a lot of corners and did that stuff that we weren't authorized to do because Roy knew it was crazy. It was zany and chaotic. And Ward and I basically planned ahead so that we always had something that we could take out, and they showed up several times and said, there's a problem with the shot. Can you take this out to the beach? Can you build this quickly? And we'd say it's already built. We'll be out there in 40 minutes.
I wanted to jump in and ask about, the talent that was working on the movie. Obviously, we had, there's Richard Dreyfuss, young, early Richard Dreyfuss, um, Robert Shaw, who is, I get, at that time, he was the heavy. He was, a movie star, been in countless, films, and Roy Scheider. Did they really kind of did they appreciate the work that you guys put into creating what you created?
Honestly, I don't think any of them ever did because it's not their job to appreciate it. They're above the line. They
Right.
make the movie. They shoot the movie. They act. They do set decoration. They do color matching. They select colors for the. It's like Spielberg's Little Red Jacket in Schindler's List.
Yeah.
It's like it's like they do the movie, the storytelling. They create the cartoon panels and the work that goes behind the panels. It's not that they're uninterested. They have too much to do. That's their own job. It's a highly specialized job.
Hmm.
Some of them came by every once in a while, but I mean, the vast majority of people in life that you will meet are invisible people. I've been invisible for most of my life, and probably for the first 40 years, I resented it, and then I realized it was my superpower. And those
You're on the
people,
right podcast.
those people that think they're visible, they are like powerless to our superpower. Our superpowers of invisibility allow us to do things that they don't need to recognize or know are happening, but they benefit from them every day.
Right.
And that's understanding that balance between the visible people and the invisible people. It's like I met uh, uh, Roy Scheider and uh, all of those guys at the catering truck
Hmm.
because every once in a while they would say, there's going to be extra food today at lunch. If you want to go up to the catering wagon, you can go up and eat. And everybody who was working with me, we consumed calories by the wheelbarrow full.
Oh, I'm
We were
sure.
starving all the time. We ate 3 times. I was working 12 hours. I'd show up, have breakfast, have lunch, and then eat dinner later on. And it's like we run across these people briefly at the catering truck, but we were invisible to them. We got out of their way and let them get their food first, or whatever it is that whatever dumb protocol had evolved
Right.
over time. But basically, it was like they were in their world and we were in our world, and virtually, me and Ward and I were where the two worlds intersected, and Ward lived a little bit above the line, and he communicated with the people he needed to communicate with, but he did it on a minimal basis because he did not want to be fired. And he was a good painter and a good carpenter, and he relied on me to do my job. We would talk about building strategies and what had to be done and how we would do it. And then he said, "Okay, that's good. Take your six best guys, put them to work today and tomorrow, and get this finished." And we would do that. And the funny thing is there's uh, a bunch of photos of me working all the time in the background in the Jaws books. There's a new book that's coming out, a new version of Memories of Martha's Vineyard, Jaws Memories of Martha's Vineyard, that will be
Hmm.
released this year. And Matt Taylor, who's turned into a good friend of mine over time, he's the author of that along with Jim Beller. And but Matt basically, I think he's done this one pretty much by himself, but he came across all these new pictures of Jaws that's included in the new version. And I helped him identify people because he's a meticulous historian and he likes to make sure that the people in the pictures are named. So, and I know most of the people. So because I lived on the island for 20 years, and I know a lot of the kids even, you know. So it's like it's a good thing. That whole uh, all the peripheral things that are going on. There's a new edition of the Book of Quint, which is not a bad novel. Um, that's coming out this year, and there's a bunch of other stuff coming out. And I'm sure that people in the comic book world are inspired to do all kinds of things as well. And there are even Jaws coloring books. So
Oh yeah,
it's
I mean, I knew this movie had. I don't want to say jumped the shark because it's not the really appropriate term, but it is. It's gone beyond just a horror movie, and in my opinion, probably one of, if not the perfect horror movie. And when I go to see, first of all, there are pop figures, there are children's novelizations of like the golden books style of
yeah,
Jaws, which I bought for my kids, but it was
yeah.
for me because my kids don't appreciate it just yet. Um, it really is just a, I hate the term, but it's a cultural phenomenon because it has transcended just being just this horror movie and film. It is just, it's amazing. It's so much fun. Like, I personally have, I rewatch it and the other movies every, 4th of July or around that time.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just part of me. And I know Oren would say the same thing. Do you, looking back now, how does that feel to be a part of, you know, to be a part of,
I,
American culture
I,
and film, greatness?
I'm an accidental part of that. I was hired because I could do what I could do, but also in terms of intellect and my ability to creatively come up with solutions. Not every idea of mine worked, and not every idea of Ward's worked, but my ability to generate creative ideas, Ward was stunned with some of the stuff I came up with because we had to come up with something and it had to be practical. It had to be in the real world and it
Hmm.
had to work and it couldn't fail. It had to be good. So um, the fact that I played a role in it, I have a very it's like the people above the line own the movie and they created the movie, they wrote the movie, they filmed the movie, they edited the movie, they did the storytelling part of the movie. So what I did isn't really part of storytelling. So I don't claim to have that. I'm happy to have done what I did, and most people who are familiar with the actual making of the movie, uh, every time anybody is doing research on the movie and people have questions to ask, and they're up against somebody who was above the line who had just one section that they were responsible for,
Hmm.
they always come up with the same line, and it's I don't know. You'll have to ask Marty Milner. And it's like it's like you know, and it's like and I always tell people this, Joe. Everybody is the hero of Jaws. I'm not the hero of Jaws. I'm kind of like the janitor, the guy at the vending machine with the mop. It's it's like everybody is the hero of Jaws, but during the movie and just after the movie, you've seen the interview that Rick Dreyfuss did where he badmouthed the movie in the fall
Hmm.
after the movie was shot. And he said, this movie is going to destroy my career. And he eventually apologized to Steven Spielberg for that interview because at that point, there were no heroes. It's like, um, uh, success has many fathers and a failure has none. And when they left the island, Verna Fields had an idea of how she might be able to make it work if she could get with John Williams, and she was lucky with the editing Rick had already done. She might be able to make that. She got the Oscar for what she did with that movie, but when they left the island, they weren't sure they had a movie they could put together.
Hmm.
It might have been a really bad movie. They didn't know for sure how it could come together. I it's funny, but I carried the cans of film to the truck when they were leaving the editing room, and I personally made sure they got onto the truck. And Rick said, this was a heck of a job. He said, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And it was funny, but it's like, you know, I take credit for what I did, and most people have no idea what I did. But I'm happy that I did my job and I executed and I made things happen that were needed and they were ready. And the people who trusted me, they were happy they trusted me because my end was never a problem. There were other people's their ends were problems, but my end was never a problem. And that's basically the way I've lived my life ever since then. It's like that's most of the invisible of our invisible tribe. We make things happen. We get the job done day in and day out, and nobody ever credits us with what we do. But without us, the world would slam to a halt pretty darn quick.
Yeah.
And that's the real. It doesn't. It's like I ended up working and finally retiring out of a local community college where I worked in workforce development with people who are basically going to be in the trades. And it's like you can carry your head with pride and you can live your life with dignity if you work for a living. And it doesn't matter what you get credit for, just get your job done and make sure you're proud of what you do, and everything will be fine.
Well, look, I first of all, there are more people out there now who know now what you did and how important it was to the development of that film. And I think we can all say that we appreciate your hard work in what you did because it shows. I mean, as again, growing up watching that movie with my father, he I mean, he probably would never have known those were sets. Obviously he knew they were sets, but just to reflect on, he would see things. I'm like, oh, this reminds me of this. And when I grew up, it was this. So you did your job just perfectly for an old New England guy to, remember his childhood and harken back to times when, he would remember things. It brings me really good memories to remember him reflecting on that stuff. So you did your job amazingly. So
Thank you. And that was and Ward always was trying to keep the budget down, but he also had an eye on continuity and making sure that each scene was perfect from several different directions. And we spent a lot of time doing micro adjusting before the people above the line could get there to criticize it because Ward, like everyone else, even the people above the line were Zanuck and Brown could have pulled the plug in a heartbeat. They could have lost their temper and just said, shut this thing down. It's not going to work. We're writing it off. And everybody was afraid that was going to happen. It was a tense, it was a very stressful time. It was like, and the friends that I made, I mean, I can, I've always been able to rely on my reputation, but my reputation on that movie was good, and people trusted me, and I could make things happen when they needed to happen. And when people didn't know what the solution was, they asked me, and they said, "What? This is the problem. What do you think we should do?" And I'd come up with two or three choices, and then I'd say probably the one that will work will be this one, but let's try two and go with the one that works. So it was like that's the way it is.
damn right.
So it was fun. I'm not sure how long this you should let this run. We're basically I think over the hour mark now, but
Yeah, no, I will go ahead and wrap it up. But before I do,
okay. By the way, do you have any other questions, Joe?
I do have just one more specifically about the orca and the shark. So I was
Yeah.
you poke around the internet, you find a lot of stuff out there, which may be true, may not be. And I read that there is still a Bruce shark at the bottom of the water, sitting there with its mechanics, and the orca is still sitting at the bottom of the water. Is that true?
No,
Okay.
all the sharks got pulled. Everything that part of their requirement for the local communities was that everything should be restored exactly to where it was
Okay.
before they started, and there would be no oil spills. There'd be no mess. Everything would be cleared, and we raked the beaches.
Okay.
We all the sharks left, and except for the one that was blown up, and that wasn't even a shark. That was just a shark head. That was the it was a foam head. It was about a half size shark, and it was loaded up with all kinds of, guts and squid and dynamite and whatever, and that
Right.
was blown up. But that was blown up when Steven was already on his way back to Hollywood. Oh, by the way,
I'm going
uh,
home. You guys got to blow this up, right? You got okay. Thank
yeah, well, they were afraid they were going to pull a prank on him, so he didn't want to get pranked at the end of the movie, so he left before, so they couldn't
you. Hey,
do
do
that.
it.
But this in the background here, this
Yeah.
is a postcard. I came out with a set of postcards. I took up watercolor a few years ago. So I made a set of 5 or 6 Jaws postcards. So if anybody is interested, the website they're on is www.cafecat.com.
All
So
right.
just thought I'd put a little plug in there. But we're going to the 50th anniversary. And anybody who's watching this that is also going to the 50th anniversary thing on the Vineyard on June 20th, feel free to like, I'll be at a number of different events, and there'll be a lot of impromptu meetings. So if anybody is coming to the 50th anniversary thing, it's going to be a fun time, and I'll be there for just about a week. And it'll be a reunion for me and a lot of my friends on the island and some of the people that worked on the movie. But that's not officially recognized because we're just like, the guys who worked on the movie.
Yeah. Well, I see that there is kind of something going on. You have a lot of people from Hollywood who have either been involved with or inspired by the movie. Like Greg Nicotero is going to be there talking,
Yeah,
and Alex Kittner. They finally got him. They brought him back.
yeah.
He's going to be
Brought him back to life.
brought him back to life. But that's amazing. Yeah, I would. If I didn't have kids that were in school, I would be there. But
The
that,
In terms of speaking to your audience
yes,
in closing, uh, if any of you have a story that's peripheral to this or inspired by it, don't hesitate to make the story happen. And there's so many people that are inspired directly by Jaws, by the storytelling arc, by the character development, by the fear, um, by the glory, by the honor, by the friendship. All of that is like the stuff that for, like I said in the first opening remarks, for 250,000 years we've been telling stories, and just because you haven't told the story yet doesn't mean you don't have a good story that might be a really worthwhile story. So in terms of like the comic book people, if there's manga people, if there's novelists, if there's short story writers, whoever you are, if you've got a story that you think is worth telling, buckle down and get that story done, and start telling that story. And if it's a good story, and if you've got that true talent, you'll make it one way or another. Benchley tapped onto that, and he got the book Jaws out of the sinking of the Indianapolis. So it's like,
that's
have
great.
at it.
Pretty amazing. Well, Marty, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your time on Jaws, and thank you for thank you for your hard work and everything that you've done. It's amazing to hear about it. As one of my favorite movies, and to know all the work that went into it. It really is something. So I greatly appreciate it.
And you're very welcome, Joe. The thing is, with me and the interview that I do, this is firsthand. It's
Yeah,
real.
absolutely.
This is I'm I'm the guy who did the work with my hands. And that's the authenticity that if like you have you what you do and your authenticity and the people that are watching, if you're an authentic person and you've created something and you've done something, then it's like that ring of truth, that entrainment when people get on your wavelength and they're totally synced with you and the sine waves overlap and it's a perfect overlap. That is storytelling and that is communication at its finest. And
Absolutely.
just to close, I'll paraphrase the last words of Robert Shaw, and I'll say, anyway, we delivered the movie.
Well, Dollar Bin Bandits fans, I hope you all enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I did recording it for you, because it's been this is an absolute dream. So thank you all so much. Please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Go online, check out Marty's work if you haven't already done so. And be sure to come back next week for another episode. Good night.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. And we are back. So what do you guys think? Marty's a pretty smart guy. He has a lot of great stories. He loves to talk about it. And I think he probably would have talked for another hour. Such a pleasure to talk to and to listen to what he had to say. Just an absolute wealth of information. And he clearly loves what he does. And I really appreciate that. And he wanted to talk to us. I mean, how great was that? But like I said, look, it's the 50th anniversary of Jaws. Get out there. If you have a chance, go to the Vineyard, check out what they have going on. They have a lot of people that are in the business, worked on the movie, maybe just fans of the movie that are in the business, and they're sharing their stories about it. So it's a lot of cool stuff going on. But if you can't, I'm sure you could find some stuff online. Certainly listen to this episode and watch Jaws again. Why not? And after you do all of that, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe for the Dollar Bin Bandits. See you next time.